Welcome to the What's Next in CBD Hemp and Cannabis 2020 edition panel. I'm Jeremy Berke. I'm a senior reporter at Business Insider, where I handle all of our cannabis coverage. We cover everything from small startups all the way up to the publicly traded companies. So we really have a full cohesive view of the entire industry. And so I'll run through some quick introductions and kick it over to the panelists to talk about their work. We have Pulak Sharma, the co-CEO of Kazmira, Kate Miller, the CEO of Miss Grass, Narbe Alexandrian, the CEO of Canopy Rivers, and last but not least, Kimberly Dillon, the founder of Frigg. So Pulak, maybe you could start us off and talk a little bit about your background, your work with Kazmira. So Pulak, maybe you could start us off and talk a little bit about your background and your work with Kazmira.
Sure, Jeremy, thank you. I'm still getting a bit of feedback, so hopefully the delay is not too bad.
Pulak, maybe you could start us off and talk a little bit about your background and your work with Kazmira.
Sure, Jeremy, thank you. I'm still getting a bit of feedback, so hopefully the delay is not too bad.
Pulak, maybe you could start us off and talk a little bit about your... Should we try this again? Let's try Narbe. Do you want to try on your end, and then we'll maybe come back to Pulak and see if we can figure out this issue?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the president and CEO of Canopy Rivers, as you mentioned. My background is in venture capital. Spent about a decade into venture capital prior to making the jump over to the cannabis side. I originally started off in a large telco, moved to the largest government incubator, moved to the largest VC fund in Canada, and then came onto the cannabis side. What was really missing on the cannabis side, in my view, was an institutional investor that's similar to the Silicon Valley type VCs that you see in the tech space. We've positioned Rivers to be a institutional investor, long-term in mind, looking for natural exit opportunities for our portfolio companies, whether that be M&A or IPO. Rivers itself, we've raised about $300 million of capital, invested in 18 portfolio companies across the value chain in Canada, the US, New Zealand, and Europe as well. And we have a global view of cannabis, having seen over 2,200 deals and pitches come through our pipeline over the last 24 months.
Kate, let's go to you next.
Hopefully that doesn't happen to me. My name is Kate. I am the co-founder and CEO of Miss Grass. We are a cannabis brand on a mission to help the world get good at weed. So we launched back in January 2018. So we've been around just shy of 3 years. And we kind of flipped the brand.
We are a cannabis brand on a mission to help the world get good at weed. So we launched back in January 2018.
You guys can hear that, right?
Just shy of 3 years, and we kind of flipped the product. We're a cannabis brand on a mission to help the world get good at weed.
There we go. That's my nightmare, to hear me speak back to myself. So we're just shy of, we're just shy of 3 years. We're one of the first audience-first brands. So instead of launching with product and building our community, we launched back in January 2018 as a contextual commerce platform, really rooted in education. So we have an online magazine, and we monetize on the e-com marketplace. To date, our e-com marketplace sells all federally legal hemp-derived cannabinoid and cannabis accessory products. It has allowed us to really scale, build a highly, highly engaged community, and have the intel and the data to now inform our own product line, which launches tomorrow. So that's the next step for us.
And Kimberly.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Dillon, and I'm the founder of Frigg. So we are a beauty and wellness line that focuses on the impacts of stress on the hair and the skin. Our specific pillars are dry skin, psoriasis, eczema, rosacea. I got into cannabis about 5 years ago. I joined an early stage startup at the time as their first CMO, which was a brand called Papa in Berkeley, which was a brand I got to see grow from 0 to 30 million in revenue in 2 years, which was a pretty crazy sort of ride, especially since that started in 2016. My career, I have 16 years of experience, has been primarily at companies like Procter & Gamble, Accenture, and Clorox. So took that CPG and consulting background and applied that to the cannabis space. And I'm really excited about where this industry is growing. I still think we're in inning one of a very exciting game.
Yeah. And Kimberly, this question is sort of just coming up right now, but can you talk a little bit about, in CPG and how, how you're kind of bringing that to the cannabis industry? Obviously, it's sort of two sides of a very, very different coin.
I think there's two approaches. One is bringing sort of that classical marketing sense to the space. I would also say that I think that my philosophy is rooted more in Silicon Valley than in CPG. I think a lot of CPG companies are sort of trying to figure out how to iterate in such a fast-moving world, but the same brand fundamentals of like having a purpose, having a value, having points of difference is key. But I think marrying that with sort of a Silicon Valley sort of ethos of iterating, because we don't have the infrastructure or the supply chain, and a brand, in my perspective, is bigger than the product in the story. I think companies of the future, the brand is also the supply chain. And so really thinking of it from an all-encompassing perspective is sort of, I think the people who do well bring that past expertise into the space.
Yeah. And I see Pulak is back here with some handy AirPods. So let's take two on this. Pulak, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and Kazmira as well.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for the intro.
Yeah,
there's a lot going on.
Tech stuff.
Co-CEO of Kazmira, we are using technology and science to build the cannabinoid ecosystem for the world. We are working on not only CBD products, but additionally focused on a lot of other cannabinoids as well, and helping power that.
Yeah. So the panel we're on is about what's next in CBD, hemp, and cannabis. Obviously, one of the biggest stories, both inside and outside of cannabis, is the 2020 election. With the Democrats putting a cannabis reform bill, or hopefully putting a cannabis reform bill to the floor soon, and cannabis reform becoming a major sort of key issue in the 2020 race. Let's talk about what that all means for the industry from your different perspectives. So just to start off, polling is looking pretty strong in Arizona and New Jersey for cannabis to be legalized for recreational or adult use, whatever language you want to ascribe to that. Narbe, as an investor, how could new states coming online, specifically New Jersey, which is right next to New York, right near the population center of Massachusetts, how could that sort of propel the industry forward?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the elections are the catalyst that we see every 4 years in terms of getting new states online and getting more population into it as well. I think with every state that goes forward, especially with a state like New Jersey, which is large, it has a real influence across the 50 states in the U.S., as well as there's a large population of cannabis users that currently go to the illicit market. This move actually brings it into the legal structure that we're seeing in many states, and propels the U.S. closer and closer to federal legalization. Outside of Arizona and New Jersey, there's a number of states out there that have deficits because of COVID-19, the economic situation they've been through. Some of these states, take Pennsylvania for example, they cannot have a deficit by law. Because of situation that took place 10 years ago in 2009 with a crash. So a lot of these states are looking to reform cannabis in a legal format in order to bring revenue tax to the state itself. With every state that gets closer and closer to legalization, actually passes that threshold, we're getting closer and closer to seeing a federal bill being passed that legalizes cannabis either on the medical side, on the recreational side, or at least gives states that want to legalize or have legalized the ability to transact interstate, or bringing banking and insurance and bankruptcy protection into those states as well. So every single one of these steps is very positive for the cannabis industry, not just in the US, but I think worldwide.
Yeah. And Kate, I know your expertise is in California, you're in Venice Beach, but what kind of message does it send, to the broader industry that the East Coast is coming as well? It's coming to the fold of cannabis and legal cannabis.
One, I'm a Jersey girl, so I take offense from the
Okay.
No, I'm kidding.
Okay. So
we are
Jersey.
California-based, but we operate across the country. To date, we've been operating on the federally legal hemp side of the business. Our product launching tomorrow is on the regulated California market, but so we do kind of have a good purview. I mean, I think what's the most exciting thing that's going to happen and kind of will lift the industry up altogether is with like decriminalization of cannabis and with the rescheduling of cannabis off of the Schedule I substance of the Controlled Substance Act will allow way more research and government funded studies to show the benefits and the efficacy of cannabis. And with that, obviously our industry can evolve for the better. The products can be better for consumers. We can get really smart on proper dosage and what the cannabinoid and terpene profiles of products for specific effects can be. So I think it will just enhance this industry overall as things progress. And then for us, with being a brand play, with, as this industry progresses and to Narbe's point, election years are definitely catalysts for that. I think we saw kind of phase one of this industry, which is like what we're in right now, inning one, where the margins and the value and everyone was focused on the infrastructure of this industry. And I think as any industry evolves, consumer brands have more and more value. So for us, being a consumer brand play, like that's also exciting.
Yeah, and Kate, you mentioned that, as cannabis reform bills pass, there'll be more research. Like, in your view, what are some of the biggest roadblocks to researching cannabis and, all of its constituent parts, all the cannabinoids?
Yeah, well, right now, because it's a Schedule I substance in our country, we can only, government can only fund studies that prove and show the negative impact and effects of cannabis. So to date, there's obviously a ton of clinical studies going on right now, which is somewhat new. A lot of them aren't done on humans, but with the rescheduling of that, the caliber of studies showing and funding things to show the benefits of cannabis will completely evolve.
Yeah. In terms of the brand side, obviously, a product that works in Southern California might not be as appealing to someone, in Lower Manhattan. Kimberly, could you talk a little bit about cannabis branding and how you expect to see changes between the East Coast, the West Coast, and I guess, increasingly Chicago and Michigan?
I mean, if you want to have an exit, I think you would solve the problem of making it relevant in California and New York.
That's a good point.
And really making sure that you can build a national brand so you're set up for when there is legalization. Already there'll be a number of challenges because every state has such different complex regulations that you're following, that it would be smart to figure out some type of pathway to some national brand that could really win, because whoever figures that out is definitely going to be a major player in the game. I think it's really understanding about where people are at. So it might be the positioning is different. The brands are really big philosophical things, but how you might educate one audience versus another could be what would be different. And so how you might talk in New York might be different about how you talk in California, because admittedly in California, cannabis has always been everywhere all the time. It's not like the same thought exercise that being said, I'm surprised that you can go to some of these middle states and get schooled as well. So I think it will be interesting, but I actually would argue that building on a pathway to a national brand would be the better approach.
Yeah. And so Kimberly, just to drill in on that, I mean, you have a lot of marketing experience. How would you talk about the same brand differently in California versus New York?
I mean, it depends, because if we're talking about on the cannabis side of the space, your packaging and what you need to communicate to the consumer might be different. However, what your brand stands for and your brand pillars, like right now, we're in a lot of social unrest. So really understanding how you show up in the world is a message that is similar. Education, I would assume for any brand, regardless of what state you're in, that you have to educate that consumer. It doesn't matter to me if you've been smoking for 20 years, you don't necessarily know the thought and the intention behind my specific product. So I would argue that the education point is the same. It might just be like the point of entry of more simplified language or what features you bring out. So even in California, I feel like when I'm at NorCal, I have to be like, oh, this terpene profile of myrcene, and I have to really pull out the science. And in LA, I don't have to do that because we're not talking about those questions. So I think it's about fitting in appropriately for where you are at.
Yeah, and Narbe, what about from the investor perspective? Like when you look at cannabis brands, what do you look for in their marketing and different communications when you're deciding either whether to invest or whether to take a meeting in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've seen over, I think it was 341 brands to date out of the 2,100 plus, 2,200 plus, and one of the things that really stands out to us is the ability for the operators to really understand the consumer, because cannabis isn't the product, it's an ingredient within the product itself. And that ingredient can help with a host of other ingredients to help with sleep, anxiety, creativity, athleticism and sports and leisure, and relaxation, depending on what the use case is. So the best entrepreneurs that we see take that CPG type of focus that Kimberly comes from, which is understand your customer, be obsessed, crazy obsessed with your customer, get data on your customer. Where do they shop? They go to Starbucks, they go to Lululemon, they go to Anthropology, and really focus on how do we cater to that customer? How do we push that messaging to the customer that solves a pain point instead of just putting a cannabis brand out there in the dispensary and making it more of a deli type option where you're just picking and choosing 100 grams of this and 200 grams of that. So it all really comes down to the operator, and that makes sense. I mean, there's no eBay for ideas out there. If I had a great idea for a cannabis product, I couldn't go up to you and sell it for $50,000. But if I went out there and executed, made a business and put it in their dispensaries and had distribution and had inventory, then I could sell it for something. So it really comes down to execution. Execution comes back to the team. So we're really zoned in on the team, specifically with CPG, when there's no real hard assets. It's an idea, it's a pain point, and you're trying to solve it. And the good entrepreneurs that we see are the ones that are extremely data focused and really understand their customer and the pain point that they're trying to solve. And the ones that we don't necessarily do deals with are the ones that are just trying to create a mainstream product and probably aren't even a user of cannabis, to be frank.
Absolutely. Before we get too deep on the brand side, I wanted to quickly turn back. I skipped over a question about federal cannabis legislation. Obviously, the Democrats they seem to have adopted a position where they support cannabis reform at the federal level. The MORE Act is supposedly coming to a House vote, although that's been called into question recently in the next few weeks. Though Joe Biden himself, he is clearly not an ardent supporter of the industry. I mean, he understands politically that it may help him. Harris has sponsored pro-cannabis legislation, but Biden has stopped short of adopting, full-scale legalization at the federal level. So, in your views, and feel free to chime in here, otherwise I'll call one of you out. How could a Democrat victory help the cannabis industry, and what do you expect to see provided polling holds true and the Democrats do indeed take the executive branch and the Senate? And Pulak, why don't we start with you?
Again.
unmute again, I think.
That.
No
She's
worries.
functionally illiterate today with computers.
Yeah.
So I don't have as much of a dog in the fight, Jeremy, as maybe some of the other folks on this panel, specifically because I'm more in the cannabinoid, focused on CBD and other non-psychoactive cannabinoids. So I think it's best if I probably pass the question to someone who does.
Sure.
But I even think some of the recent legislation that was passing on the hemp side was suggesting that, like, if on the way to your factory something was over 0.03%, that would actually be considered cannabis. That, I think, would be a huge sort of impact on the hemp side of the business. So I do think it kind of is all related, the hemp and cannabis together. I think when we talk about legalization, I think that there's a lot of benefits from society beyond just our industry. Number one, huge economic driver in terms of entrepreneurship and employment. We have so many people who are out of jobs, or so many small businesses have closed down. Number two, if you have a felony in this country, in a lot of states, you can't actually vote. So actually giving people the empowerment who've been in prison due to the war of drugs, the ability to actually vote and have a say in this country's government. Three, healthcare is insane. So like having another alternative for consumers to go to a plant-based medicine, or to have other types of tools that don't necessarily have the same bill structure as pharma. Mm-hmm. So I think from a societal perspective, I think, yes, as an industry, I want this to happen, but I actually think that there's so many benefits for us as a country. And I think it only behooves whichever party is in power that this is what people actually want. And there's so much actual potential that I mean, it's very rare to like help the economy, help yourself, help your health all at the same time. So for me, I think it's powerful. And I actually think it's actually shocking to me how politicians are not thinking about this thoroughly.
So to drill into that a little bit, I mean, how do legislators and those lobbying for this legislation balance some of the social justice concerns with the pro-industry concerns? And what are some of the inherent challenges or symbiotic relationships there? Kimberly, I'll let you start with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the people who are, to date, the people who really push the lobby are either really large organizations, or they are of the social activist component. And so it's really coming together, especially coming off this summer of Black Lives Matter, mm-hmm. and consumers paying incredibly more attention to their purchasing dollar. I do not think legalization will be successful unless social equity is resolved and part of that conversation, because there will be a huge backlash already in New York when they pushed for legalization. I think 2 years ago, one of the reasons why it got stopped was due because the people who were really supporting social equity didn't have their needs met. So I really do think it's a parallel path to legalization. We can't leave people out on the table. The opportunity is too huge. And so it's really in the best interest of large companies and the MSOs to partner with organizations that they are thinking are doing the right and good work, because it benefits both parties. And they may not have the same, one may have the money and one may have like the social capital, and they really should come together to push this forward.
Not to get too granular on this topic, but one of the issues, at least that surfaced in our reporting in New York, was the idea of who could own licenses. A lot on the activist side were saying that licenses should be widely available to small scale cultivators to allow, like you said, Kimberly, the economic incentive of legalized cannabis to filter out to those populations who, may be most affected by the previous war on drugs. Whereas a lot of the MSOs, obviously, it is useful to them to own as much of the licenses as possible and create an oligopoly, right? That affects their share price. Investors like that. So, we may see these issues surface again in New York, and we may see these in other states. But my question is, where is the middle ground there, and how can they work together to allow MSOs to create good markets for themselves and have that reflected in their share price, while also allowing others to participate in the industry? And maybe Narbe, I'll kick that to you at first.
cut off for me. Your video stopped for a second. Can you just quickly repeat that last piece?
Yeah, the question was basically how do we balance concerns over licenses with the MSOs who want to own as much of the industry as possible for obvious reasons, and to smaller craft scale cultivators.
Yeah, I think there's generally, if you take a step back and you look at this as a industry, there's two types of companies that are really going to succeed. Those craft cultivators that are producing a high quality premium product meant for premium customers, people that are willing to pay above and beyond the normal price to get high quality product. And then there's going to be product that's going to be sold on volume, still going to be quality, but it's going to be at a value type of purchase. Anybody stuck in between that's selling low quality cannabis for a high price or high quality cannabis for a low price is going to be kind of either they're not going to make enough margin, or they're going to get nobody's going to buy their product because the price and the quality don't match each other. So we're going to see those two really play out. When you look at the licensing structure of the US, it's really based on state-by-state legalization. Our belief and our thesis is that as federal legalization emerges, you're going to see the full US being used. So you're going to see product coming out of Texas and Arizona where there's low humidity, there's more sunlight throughout the entire day, so you don't have to put as much LED lighting in, and you can really cultivate at a low cost. And they're going to cultivate there and push it out to the rest of the market. So when you look at some of the MSOs that are trying to build facilities all over the US, some of these states just don't make sense for greenhouse production. They don't make sense for indoor production. They don't make sense for outdoor production like some other states do. So there is going to be a sort of like a little bit of a reset when that takes place, which means, and then everyone is going to come off on a level ground, because as of right now, the states don't even have quality standards that really talk to one another, and you need that as well. So either federal legalization resets it all and everyone follows the same type of structure of pesticides and heavy metals and microbials, et or maybe the US just takes the approach of finding the highest common denominator, probably being California right now, of the biggest bar in terms of what you need to do to get product into market, and making everyone else follow that so that interstate commerce can be done more easily.
And so what about internationally speaking? You mentioned that there are environments in the US which just are not conducive to growing cannabis cheaply. If we see countries in Central and South America, in Southern Africa, legalize cannabis, do you think that this will become, an import market in the US?
Yeah, it really depends on the laws. So like for CBD, for example, hemp-derived CBD, there's a thesis out there that you're going to see a lot of that coming out of China. We know there's a number of large companies that are legal in China that can extract hemp, and they can take that oil and then spread it around the world at a very low cost. And these aren't mom and pop shops. These are large-scale pharmaceutical grade GMP extractors of product. On the THC side, is a bit more trickier because the UN doesn't allow you to ship flower that's THC based from somewhere like Latin America to the rest of the world. So that's going to take some time to get through. If you look at it in the long term and you say, you know what, the world is going to legalize cannabis in 25 years and a lot of the industrial countries will have that, then yes, you'll see probably CBD coming out of China, THC coming out of Latin America. But that's mostly going to be for extraction quality product, and the real flower quality product is going to be grown domestically. I'll caveat that by saying that as governments look to legalize, they're not looking to create an import-export market. They're looking at first as a protectionist type of measure. So they're going to want to say that if I'm going to legalize cannabis in Germany, sure, we'll have some imports coming in the short term just to balance out the supply and demand. But in the long term, I want the tax money for myself, and I want the jobs for myself, and that's the whole reason I'm legalizing, is to create more jobs and to keep it domestic versus giving a bunch of money to the US and Canada and Latin America, etc. So it is up for debate. You can go either way on it. There's a number of facts that support and refute each of those theses, but it's a crystal ball that we're all trying to guess.
Yeah. Pulak, could you chime in there from the hemp side? I mean, obviously, you have your assets based in the US, but, do you foresee 5-10 years down the road that you'll shift maybe to lower cost centers? Obviously, you guys did announce a deal with Perigo recently, and so you have some, high level oversight there. So I'm wondering how you are prepping for that.
Yeah, I think at this stage it's really focusing on the United States. Again, it's a constantly moving target, Jeremy. So I think
Oh, did we lose him?
Poor guys have been having so much trouble with tech.
I know. I feel the tech is an issue here. Let's let's keep it moving, I guess, and we'll come back to him as he kind of figures out his situation. Sorry. One of the categories of questions I wanted to get at as we come down to the last 10 minutes here is the other cannabinoids outside of CBD. Obviously, Pulak, are you back with us?
Hello?
We got you.
I'm not sure what's going on.
We
Okay,
can hear you
so
now if you wanted to.
I'm not able to see anybody, so
Yeah, you said it was a constantly moving target.
but yeah, I think
I'll take it from there.
cut off as that being the answer.
Okay, appreciate that. So we were segueing into talking about the other cannabinoids outside of CBD. Obviously, CBD has been all the rage, but there is increasing research, as Kate said, about these other cannabinoids and how they affect different aspects of your health, whether it's sleep, for exercise. So just to start off with, maybe Kate, you could touch on, what do you think will have a breakout year like CBD? There's a lot of talk about CBG, about others. So could you kind of lay that out for us and what's on your radar there?
There's definitely a lot of brands that we're already starting to see, including Frigg with Kimberly Dillon, that are starting to highlight and use other cannabinoids beyond just CBD. I think when I squint and look ahead, I think the whole idea of it being a CBD product or a CBN product, I think we'll start to think of cannabinoids more as ingredients versus like product led. And I think that the evolution and focusing on some of the other minor cannabinoids in this plant will go in parallel with the amount of research coming out there. But as it relates to like your question on what I feel like will have a breakout year, that's I feel like we're like betting on like a sporting team or something, but CBN is a cannabinoid that is really helpful for relaxation, and you see it in a lot of sleep products. That has already, at least from what we see on our e-com marketplace, performs extremely well for us. Kimberly uses CBG, so she should speak to that.
Please.
My philosophy, and it's an interesting position to be in. We've only been live for 7 weeks, and we're not as forward with the CBD or the CBG that we use. We're really focused on what's the end result, which we're solving. Like we have a scalp oil that's really around solving pain from tight hairstyles and from psoriasis. So we've actually had a couple consumers who are like, whoa, there's CBD in this, even though like it's on the front and on the back, etc. So for us, I've treated it more of an ingredient and an educational touch point, but I haven't let it as a selling point. Quite frankly, I have to educate you on CBD and now also CBG. That's a lot of education messages. And if we're still at the idea that you think a topical might get you high, talking about the science of CBN, which is already kind of thin based on like 1 or 2 studies, is a lot of a lift. And like, I'm a pretty good marketer, and even I'm like, that's a lot of messaging points. So I think that a lot of the innovation will be on the back end, and it still will be important to talk to the consumer about the benefits of your products and have information that's available for the certain percentage of consumers that really wants to know. But for me, it's not a top messaging point. But the reason why we did use some of the cannabinoids and the terpenes was we had a very specific effect that we were going after. And what was interesting is that actually one of a popular cannabinoid does the opposite of what we were looking to do. And so that was fascinating to learn, because we're all generally full spectrum and we want this whole plant. And then in our research with the pharmacologist, we actually found out that there was a terpene and a cannabinoid that was detrimental to our end result. So I think there has to be a lot of research and refinement, and it's more about the effect and what the consumer can expect than sticking something in from a marketing perspective. I love a vanity ingredient, but man, that's a hard marketing story, I think, to sell.
How did you find out that the cannabinoid had the opposite effect? I mean, how did you conduct that research and how come you guys were so
with some extracts on a number of people's scalps, and we're looking specifically for hair growth, and there are some pretty strong correlations between who did not see hair growth and what that terpene profile in their strain was. And then there was a lot of research also done. We didn't conduct it, but also on rodents, and it was a similar sort of interaction. And so I feel like we have so much to learn as it relates to dosing and how these cannabinoids work together, and then how even the terpene and the presence of one terpene, how it can modulate or down regulate some of these cannabinoids. Like, there's a lot of science and work to be done, which is exciting.
Yeah, but I think you and Kate touched on an interesting point where it's less about like, wow, this shampoo has CBD in it versus that just being another ingredient that targets it. So it's kind of inverting the model of what you'd think. It's not like, wow, we have a CBD infused cupcake. It's like this product uses CBD and it's scientifically proven to help treat or heal a certain ailment. So I think that's a pretty interesting paradigm shift.
The last thing I'll say, go ahead, Kate.
No, go for it.
You're going to say the same thing I'm going to say, I know.
I was just going to say, I think gone are the days that you can put CBD on it'll sell off the shelves. I think consumers, there's a wave of conscious consumerism even beyond cannabis, and consumers are now smarter about this plant, about CBD and other cannabinoids. We'll see less and less of these like CBD mascaras and CBD leggings that do shit for the consumer, because this industry is evolving and consumers are just smarter about this plant.
Yeah. So we have just about a couple minutes left here. So I'll leave you all with one last question. Again, Kate, it's like we're gonna bet on sports here. What industry do you expect will be most subverted, or I don't know what the word you want to use here, by cannabinoids, whether it's CBD, CBG, CBN, THC? I mean, what industry has the most to gain from cannabis legalization, and maybe what industry has the most to lose? And maybe Narbe, I can start with you here.
So again, this is my opinion. I think that the industry has the most to gain is pharma. We already know that there's about 400 to 500 patents that are being developed by some of the largest pharmaceutical companies around the world. They don't talk about it. You see the filings though. They're looking at cannabinoids, they're looking at cannabis, and they want to really own that piece as it starts to cannibalize their pharmaceutical sales. And that's up to $20 billion of pharmaceutical sales in North America alone that could be cannibalized by cannabis. So it's a tongue twister. And then the industry that's going to be hurt, the sector that's going to be hurt the most, in my opinion, would be tobacco. And liquor, I'd say. Liquor and tobacco, I tie them up because they're vices, and now you have a brand new vice coming in, and it's going to take up mind share, it's going to take up market share. Anybody who uses THC products knows that mixing with alcohol doesn't give you the best feeling. You can't really do that as much. So you're going to see some cannibalization of cigarettes and alcohol as consumers move towards more health conscious alternatives in cannabis.
And I think we got time for one more. So Kimberly, I'm going to kick it to you.
I would say from a consumer perspective of an industry that I think will be disrupted the most, I'm going to go with supplements, and I actually do think beauty. I think the amount of testing that is involved for this one ingredient is far more than what we see in the general market of the same categories. And so I think that it will push us into more transparency on the supplement and on the beauty side, as consumers are looking for test results for one ingredient out of 40 in their face oil. I think the other 39 will now have to be tested and evaluated as well. And so I think that's disrupting those industries from a consumer demand perspective as we start to train her to think about the test results and the transparency and where her ingredients are coming from. I think what's happening from cannabis on the CBD side will translate into those other sectors.
Great. And we're just about at 12:45, so I'll wrap it up there. I appreciate you all joining us. That was a fascinating discussion, and I appreciate all the audience bearing with some of our technical challenges. It's not a Zoom panel without some of those. So appreciate everyone, and thanks for tuning in.